Imagine dropping a stone into a well and waiting, but never hearing the splash. That silence isn't just physics, it's a blueprint for a certain kind of pain most people never learn to name. Think of a child in a living room, their small voice offering up a drawing, a question, a scrap of a story. In a healthy emotional environment, something comes back. Maybe it's a look, a nod, a shared laugh, a silent signal that says, "I see you. You exist in this moment." But what happens when the well is empty? When no reflection returns, when the emotional sound just evaporates, a child's mind doesn't blame the architecture of the room. It blames the source. The logic is simple and devastating. If my sound disappeared, it must be because I wasn't worth hearing. This is where a specific, often invisible wound begins to form. For decades, psychology has mapped trauma by its events, the sharp, singular moments you can point to. The accident, the loss, the explicit harm, but that framework misses an entire ocean of suffering, one that doesn't qualify for a memoir because the damage wasn't done by what happened, but by what didn't. The birthday party no one remembered, the tears that dried alone behind a closed door. These aren't events you can put on a timeline, so where do they go? A mother's gaze that drifted past your excitement, a father's distraction at your moment of triumph. You can't bring these moments to a jury. They feel like nothing to everyone but you. Yet they leave marks, quiet, persistent grooves in the mind. The clinical term for this is childhood emotional neglect, and it remained an understudied blind spot for so long because of its very nature. It is defined by an absence, not a presence. The deepest wounds aren't always made by something, but by something that never arrived. Here's the developmental truth beneath the silence. A child learns to understand their own emotions the same way they learn language, through a mirror. When a caregiver looks at a crying child and says, "That's frustration, isn't it? You wanted the red cup," they aren't just comforting. They're handing the child a dictionary for their internal world. But what happens when you grow up without a dictionary? When that mirroring is absent, rare, inconsistent, or never there, the child doesn't just feel lonely. They grow into an adult who is genuinely and often bewilderingly disconnected from their own internal state. Psychologists call this alexithymia, the inability to name your own feelings. It's not being stoic, it's a fundamental gap left by an emotional echo that never came back. Imagine navigating a world where everyone else seems to have a map of their inner terrain and you're walking through fog, wondering why you can't find the landmarks. What this creates in adulthood is a paradox. On the outside, these are often the high-functioning ones, the reliable friend, the overachiever, the one who has it all together. They've mastered the art of appearing fine because that was the survival skill learned before they could even form memories. Dr. Jonas Webb, who coined the term, describes patients who come to her with a vague, persistent sense of wrongness. Not depression, not anxiety, just a flatness. A life experienced as if you're watching it happen on a screen, slightly muffled, slightly behind glass. And then there's relationships. This is where the hidden script becomes visible. Why would someone who craves connection consistently sabotage it? A person who grew up feeling invisible doesn't just struggle to connect. They often destroy the connection precisely when it starts to feel real. A genuine compliment is deflected with a joke. Unconditional love feels suffocating instead of safe, like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. This makes perfect sense. If the emotional food was inconsistent growing up, your system eventually stops asking for it. You become an expert in self-reliance. You tell yourself, you don't need anyone. You handle everything. That hyper-independence is celebrated by the world, but it's just a very old, very smart coping mechanism. Hyper-independence isn't strength. It's a child's strategy to survive emotional starvation. The desire for closeness didn't disappear. It went underground. Its voice silenced because it learned long ago that crying out in the dark was a waste of energy. A 2024 review in Child Abuse and Neglect confirmed this link, noting that emotional neglect remains one of the least studied forms of childhood pain, the invisible wound we've spent the least time trying to heal. I need you to understand something critical here. The way you learned to behave wasn't a flaw. It was a solution. a brilliant adaptive solution to a situation that demanded you shrink. The child who went quiet learned that silence was safe. The child who became the clown learned that laughter was the only currency that worked. The one who threw themselves into books or became the caretaker for everyone else, they were all using the only tools available to survive. The tragedy isn't the adaptation. It's that the adaptation outlives its usefulness. You're not in that room anymore. But your nervous system hasn't gotten the memo. How do you convince a body that the danger is gone when it was never physically present to begin with? You're still flinching at kindness, still feeling uneasy when someone holds the door without expectation, still struggling to identify what you're feeling, like trying to hear a conversation through thick, soundproof glass. Here's the good news. It's not permanent. Neuroplasticity is on your side. Therapy that focuses on this kind of neglect works, but healing starts somewhere smaller. It starts with the quiet, radical decision that your own experience is worth taking seriously. That just because no one showed up when you were small doesn't mean you weren't worth showing up for. You always were. What that looks like day to day isn't a Hollywood catharsis. It's noticing that you're angry and instead of burying it, just letting it sit there for a moment. It's catching yourself deflect a compliment and pausing to ask, why did I just do that? These small moments of attention might seem insignificant, but for someone who was never taught that their inner world mattered, learning to pay attention to it is the entire point. If something in this resonated with you, if the phrase emotional neglect felt like a key turning in a lock, pay attention to that. That recognition isn't just insight. It's your nervous system doing something it might never have learned to do. It's echoing back to itself, faintly, maybe for the first time. But it's there. The sound was always worth echoing. It just needed a different room. If this hit home, or put words to something you've been carrying, please hit that like button and subscribe to Wines of Thought. We dive deep into the architecture of the mind, and there's a lot more to explore. I've got other videos on the screen right now that I think you'll see yourself in. I'll see you there.